Well, good morning. Many thanks for allowing me to be part of your Sunday morning this morning. I'm here in Auschwitz II, Birkenau, in southern Poland, the second of two terrible death camps that the Nazis set up in Poland. The place behind me, not much of it remains from early days, but the stacks that you can see are chimneys, and in each of these chimneys were barracks, which have now long gone. Probably as far as you can see in the camera, those stacks extending up round about me represent an area that accommodated at times over 50,000 people. So in the days I stayed in Kilmarnock, something almost the size of Kilmarnock. Huge number of people, and over 1 million people passed through this place. Most of them, of course, were executed in the gas chambers, which would just be down there where you see the people arising from. I'm going to turn to the book of Revelation and chapter 15 just for a couple of verses to share this morning. Revelation 15:1 says, "And I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvellous, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues, for in them is filled up the wrath of God. And I saw as it were a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that had gotten the victory over the beast, and over the image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, stand in the sea of glass, having the harps of God." And we do look to God to bless his word to us this morning. There are many questions that a place like Auschwitz causes us to ask. Many questions about the justice of God, the righteousness of God. How can God allow such a thing to happen? I'm not going to try and answer all or even many of those questions, but one thing that Revelation 15 throws up for us is a thought that God is in control. And sometimes one of the questions that comes when we look at a place like this is that question, is God in control? Revelation 15 describes sadly a time in the future which will not be too unlike the times that the people here in Auschwitz saw, times of persecution, martyrdom and death. And yet as they're chased to the edge of oblivion, as they're being persecuted in the latter days that the book of Revelation describes, they're chased not only out of time, but they're chased into heaven. And they stand there persecuted, rejected and martyred and murdered. They stand there at the edge of the crystal sea. And it's fascinating to see that that is a pattern that you find right the way through the Bible. There were days in the past when God's people were pursued and persecuted to the edge of oblivion. There's a day that's described in the book of Exodus, in fact, when the nation of Israel were pursued by Pharaoh, and Pharaoh had it as his plan to get rid of this nuisance group of slaves that were getting too big for their own good in Egypt, and he trapped them between the Red Sea and between Egypt. They were persecuted out of Egypt, and yet God was still in control. And as they were driven to the edge of the sea to be drowned, so far as Pharaoh was concerned, like rats to be gotten rid of, God was so in control that he opened up that pathway into the promised land. It may have been Pharaoh's intention to destroy them, but it was God's ultimate purpose to deliver them. He was very much in control. They'd gone through much persecution, but there was a God who was sovereign. Amongst the many sights that you see here in Auschwitz, you see many people that come perhaps out of curiosity, some out of pilgrimage, but some also out of a collective sense of memory. And amongst the people that crowd through this place are many that have a flag on their back, and it's the flag of the nation of Israel. And perhaps a very sombre thought that we can share from this place is that following the tragic events of Auschwitz and the persecution that was seen here, this was used in many ways to move a world that was lukewarm towards the nation of Israel. And out of the ashes of Auschwitz there arose a nation, the nation that we now refer to as Israel. 1948 it was established as a consequence of the horrendous events that happened as a consequence of Nazism and the persecution of that people. And so perhaps whilst there are many questions we could ask about this and about the wickedness of men that produced this, about the evil that is within man that caused this, One thing perhaps that we can see is that from that emerges the hand of a God who's in control, because he delivers ultimately a people and he establishes a nation in fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecies of Ezekiel, Jeremiah and other passages in the Bible. And out of the ashes of this place emerges a nation. And some of them are back here this afternoon, remembering parents and grandparents that came here and who paid with their blood and with their suffering. They paid the cost of that nation. We have a God, but he doesn't abandon us to evil. A place like this reminds us of the evil of man's heart, but that's not the end of the story. God is a God of redemption. He's a God of salvation. He's a God who is not distant and far away, but enters into our suffering. A God who is not simply one who stands afar off, but in his Son, we are told in the book of Isaiah that he was wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities, and the suffering of our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. Many thanks for being with me this morning. Thank you.